and welcome everybody. My name is JB Holson. I'm the CEO of the Greater Washington Partnership. It's great to have everyone on today. We're here to talk about transit-oriented development in the region. We issued, with our friends EY and the help of many others, a report on this topic, and we'll talk about that during the conversation today. But just briefly about the partnership. The partnership was formed in 2017 to help catalyze solutions to scale to some of the region's most pressing opportunities, particularly those where a regional view is critical. And of course, nothing is more regional by definition than transportation. We're happy about all the work we've been able to contribute to. We really do feel it's helping to differentiate this region competitively for the long term. And within that category, transit-oriented development is a particularly acute opportunity from our perspective, because we're, as a region, well set up to take advantage of transit-oriented development. We came out with a study yesterday that talked about plans to return to work and talked about the fact that many employers are going to be much more hybrid when they return, which probably means a lot less commuting, at least at normal times, to downtowns. But interestingly, probably increases the opportunity for the region around initiatives like transit-oriented development. And there's an imperative too, from an equity perspective. The best person to talk about all of that is our first guest, whom I want to introduce, Congressman Anthony Brown. He's a leader on transit and transit-oriented development around the nation. He represents the 4th District of Maryland in the U.S. House of Representatives. I want to thank you, Congressman, both for joining us and for your leadership with bills like the More Transit-Oriented Development Act you introduced in late 2019. But thanks for your energy ensuring that these opportunities are at the forefront of everything that's happening in our region. Congressman Brown, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me. Good afternoon to everyone, JB and everyone at the Greater Washington Partnership. Again, just thanks for inviting me to participate this afternoon. Also, just want to thank the partnership for its commitment to and work involving a strategy for transit-oriented development in Anne Arundel County, and how transit-oriented development can help the region create more inclusive communities. For my entire public sector career, I've been dedicated to working with the private sector to delivering transit-oriented development. Transit-oriented development presents a tremendous opportunity for our communities. It results in economic development that's more equitable and sustainable, and we can utilize existing transit centers like in Anne Arundel County to help revitalize our communities. In Congress, as JB mentioned, I've introduced legislation that would expand federal resources to support transit-oriented development projects. Currently, existing transit systems like WMATA and MARC aren't eligible for federal planning grants. My bill removes those barriers to allow communities like ours to receive federal funds in order to build for the future. Anne Arundel County has already invested in transit, making the county an ideal place for TOD. Our region can capitalize on our existing infrastructure to grow and support communities already around transit. The bill I introduced was included in the landmark infrastructure package that passed the House of Representatives last Congress. And with the Biden-Harris administration, I'm optimistic that we can get this bill passed into law this year. I'm also confident that our region will receive a fair hearing for grant applications from a good friend of mine, our new Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. The recent TOD study released by the Greater Washington Partnership, Ernst Young and County Executive Pittman, strengthens the case for TOD and validates this approach. It provides us a roadmap to help create thriving and inclusive communities around our transit stations. I'm committed to doing my part and working alongside County Executive Pittman, the private sector, the partnership, and all of you to make smart transit-oriented development in our region a reality. The study marks a turning point for us in both Prince George's and Anne Arundel counties, as well as the state of Maryland. By setting a vision of what's possible in the near term, we can work together to build a more transit-oriented region and a more inclusive and sustainable future. So thank you for the chance to kick off this conversation. And I'd now like to hand it off to Joe McAndrew, the partnership's Vice President of Transportation, who will be emceeing this event. Joe?
Congressman, thank you so much. Thank you very much for taking part and joining us today, but also your leadership on this matter and others that are important to the region that we all call home. Special thank you to everybody that's joining us today, folks that are going to help us make this all happen. Thank you very much for taking time out of your day to join the discussion. This work, as JB and the Congressman hinted, builds off of, or the conversation that we're having today builds off a TOD study that we at the Greater Washington Partnership did in partnership with our partners at Ernst Young. We worked hand in hand with County Executive Alsobrooks and County Executive Pittman to conduct a study of transit-oriented development potential in both counties and that benefit for the state of Maryland. The project as a whole produced 3 reports looking at growing the economy and building a more inclusive region. I'm going to start the conversation today talking about why the partnership did this work, why our board, its board, the businesses and the business community at large cares about transit-oriented development. You know, businesses know that we need to have access to good, quality, reliable public transit that helps them attract and retain our large and very diverse, talented workforce. Public transit is that anchor for many of them, and they're making investment decisions as a result. It improves their quality of our region's quality of life, access to jobs, the ease of their ability to do business, and providing employees, their employees, access to a wider range of housing options, which is important in today's hot housing market. Not to mention the sustainability benefits. The capital region's business leaders understand that we need a good transit system to be able to drive that type of economic development. They're doing their part to invest in the station areas throughout the region. And that was one of our key priorities in terms of looking at this, in terms of making sure that we can do this in a more balanced regional investment program. But for this study, there we go. We really focused in on 7 stations that we identified with the county executive and his team in both Anne Arundel and then the county executive and Prince George's that haven't yet fully realized their transit-oriented development potential. While each station has unique challenges and opportunities, there are also common obstacles to transit-oriented development at the county and state level that we identified in this work. Our partners at Ernst Young conducted 2 technical reports that our colleague Steve Tozier will cover here in a few. But we at the partnership developed a targeted list of recommendations that really kind of buckets those cross-cutting county-specific recommendations as well as the state recommendations into 4 categories with corresponding next move recommendations. They really center on the need to set and maintain a vision for TOD. That's really important at each station area so that the private sector knows what the vision is and they can do their part to help realize it. We also need to prioritize equity within the planning and the incentives programs to make sure that those that are there today can benefit and those that aren't there today can also gain access and a foothold in the future development. We also need to target the resources. We've got big counties, a lot of opportunity for investment, but if this is a preferred economic development pattern, we've got to target our resources to these areas. Then we also need to streamline our processes for development in these areas, making sure that it is as equal, if not easier, to ultimately create the types of economic development and investments that we're looking for at these stations. This slide shows you some of the cuts of the recommendations, both for the state and for the counties. There are many of them in there, and we will explore them in greater detail in the panel discussion here shortly. I would encourage you to visit our website if you're interested and follow up. We're more than willing work with everybody, because I think understanding what we're recommending and working together to make it happen is going to be important. Center to all of this work, I think, is making sure that we can do this in an inclusive and equitable way at our transit stations. That hasn't always been the case. I think there are certain station areas that development has happened so quickly throughout the capital region from Baltimore to Richmond that those communities that were once there may not be there today because of price valuation. And we might not have the right tools in place to make sure that we can incentivize affordable, diverse housing types as well as business opportunities. And I think that's really important and critical to this work. And we've made recommendations here to make sure that we're targeting affordable housing, business retention, and inclusive growth, as well as making sure that we can measure our success. Because if we're not measuring this, we'll never be able to ultimately ensure that we're getting there. But TOD, transit-oriented development, has the potential to create so many benefits for our region, achieve many of our goals that are in most of our land use plans, our sustainability plans, our transportation plans. The challenge or the opportunity is how we get there. And I think that that's what we were trying to do at the partnership and with our partners at EY and others throughout the region, to make sure that we could ultimately identify a path, a roadmap, shall we say, and then work together to catalyze that type of growth in the years to come. Before turning it over to our panel, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Steve Tozier from Ernst Young. This is where I cut off earlier this morning, so bear with me, I'm still here. But Steve, if you want to take over and give a little bit of a summary of your work and the importance about what the impact could be for the county if we can go ahead and realize this transit-oriented development future, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Joan. I'm glad you were able to hang on this one. EY was approached by GWP to help with creating a study, as Joe mentioned, to focus on unlocking the potential of TOD in the region, and specifically the focal point was on Anne Arundel and Prince George's counties that historically have not experienced the same level of TOD growth as some of the surrounding counties. And as Joe mentioned just previously, there were 7 station areas across the 2 counties that were subject of the analysis, and the 3 for Anne Arundel County were Odenton, Cromwell, Glen Burnie, and Laurel Racetrack. For each station area, the EY team modeled the hypothetical development possible based on a variety of factors. We looked at comparable case studies of TOD elsewhere. We looked at construction trends. We looked at market conditions. We looked at common barriers to TOD at the state level, at the county level, at the station level. We looked at existing site plans that maybe were already filed by developers. We evaluated existing planning studies. Very important part of the analysis is that there were already some great studies out there that we could build upon. And we also conducted over 100 stakeholder interviews, which is very important. So in addition to bringing in all the data-driven quantitative elements of the things I just mentioned, and looking at such things as wetlands and topography and assembly of land and parcel size and all of those data-driven elements, we also heard from stakeholders from a wide variety of places, both public and private. We heard from developers, we heard from economic development officials, we heard from the transportation community itself, we heard from the counties, we heard from the business community. We really wanted to get a multi-dimensional viewpoint on what transit-oriented development could look like in each of these station areas. And the hypothetical visioning based upon this analysis estimated that across these counties, the potential is to increase the commercial and residential square footage significantly by tens of millions of square feet over 25,000 net new jobs across the counties, billions of dollars of increased economic output across these counties, and tens of millions of dollars of incremental tax revenue. So in order to realize these outcomes, I think, one of the things that, we really dialed into was overcoming the barriers that are present in each one of these station areas, and each one is unique in that sense. And across both counties, I think the themes that we dialed into were that public-private partnership is absolutely essential. Increased funding is needed for TOD. Streamlining approvals, which was shown on one of Joe's slides, very important. Having kind of a clear vision across all stakeholders, and strategic implementation, quite frankly, of the last mile and the placemaking efforts that are necessary for making TOD a reality. And I'll just conclude by saying that, at the heart of all of this, social and economic equity, as Joe said, sustainability, land conservation, all these very important issues that are at the heart of TOD were absolutely at the forefront for us as we conducted our research. So I'm very happy to be part of the conversation today. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Joe.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you to your entire team that were with us every step of the way. We were intending to wrap this one up late last year, but due to the global pandemic, we needed to be resilient and adapt. But we're happy with where we are. We're coming out of the pandemic this year, and I think the work that we're doing together to plan for it and work to catalyze growth at these station areas is going to be important. We're going to shift now to a panel conversation with 4 key stakeholders that were helping us every step of the way, informing us our work, but also providing feedback as well. For folks, if you don't want to see the entire screen here, you can go up to the right corner and click on speaker view, so you're only seeing the folks that are talking. But after the panel, we're going to go ahead and do a bit of a breakout session before we wrap up and conclude today. But we are very excited to listen in and digest the conversation. We'll start. We're lucky to have Kevin Quinn, the administrator for Maryland Department of Transportation's Transit Administration. He'll also be joined by Matt Power, the Office of the County Executive of Anne Arundel County. He is the Chief Administrative Officer. Nimisha Sharma is the Director of the Maryland Department of Transportation's Office of Real Estate and Economic Development. And Wesley McQuilliam, Business Development and Land Use and Real Estate Lead for Anne Arundel County's Economic Development Corporation. And here to moderate this great conversation is Sarah Klein, a consultant for the Greater Washington Partnership, leads SK Solutions, used to be Senator Sarbanes and the Democrats in the U.S. Senate's transit lead, and we're quite lucky to have her here with us today. So Sarah, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Joe. Looking forward to this conversation. I think that one of the lessons that we learned from our work over the past year and a half, and even before that, is that it takes many parties to have successful transit-oriented development, and we have so many of those parties able to join us today on the panel, and then others that will be able to help advance the conversation in the breakout groups after the panel. So this is going to be terrific. I'm going to start by addressing what is sort of the elephant in the room, and Joe alluded to it. We launched this study last year on March 10th. About 3 days later, everything shut down. But recognizing that transit-oriented development is a long-term, long-acting investment, we decided to continue going forward. And amazingly, we got support from so many folks who also wanted to see the conversation advance. That being said, the pandemic obviously has had a significant impact on transit, and Administrator Quinn, you can get ready because I'm going to turn this to you in just a second first. On transit, but on families, on businesses, on economic outlook for everyone. And so our question really is, how should we be thinking about transit-oriented development in the context of the pandemic? And again, Administrator Quinn, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. Happy to address that. Can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
Wonderful. We were having issues before we got started, so I'm glad that's working out. Well, first, thanks so much for having me, for having the panel here. It's such an important topic right now, and perhaps you could argue it's perhaps even more important given everything that happened. It's happening, I guess, with the pandemic, right? So, from a transit perspective, we've seen a number of things. Primarily pretty significant decreases in ridership. So on our MARC lines and our commuter bus service, we've seen a roughly 90% drop. So just think about that, fathom that for a second, that we have 10% of the MARC riders that we had, roughly this time last year. Our light rail and our metro ridership is down about 70%. The big one for us that I think really shows the importance of our bus system is that our bus ridership is down only about 50%. There's only a couple other systems in the nation that are higher than us in terms of how much bus ridership they retain. But those declines in transit use, especially on the MARC system and on the light rail system as it relates to kind of this discussion, will certainly have big impacts on land use. Essentially what does the T in TOD look like moving forward? I think Sarah, I think you brought up a really good point that I was thinking about earlier, which is that in a way, transit, and I think our perspective is we're here for the long game, right? There are developers that may come in, there are in a way, administrations that change. Transit is here and will be here 20 years from now and 30 years from now and 50 years from now. And so I think we're here for the long game. I think for us, there's a couple of key pieces. One is really continuing to let people know that the systems are safe and they are clean, especially in times like these. And I think another key piece for us is reliability. Showing people that transit can be relied on, that they can move to these TOD areas, that developers can come to these areas, and that there is good, safe, clean, reliable transit that people can use that can help draw people to these TODs. But I think from our perspective, TOD is such a great opportunity to increase ridership and to build on the investments that we're making. We have made such great investments in transit throughout the state. TOD is such a great springboard off of those great investments that have been made.
Absolutely. I think we agree 100%, both in terms of supporting you and addressing the challenges you're facing now, as well as looking at that longer game. The report itself took that approach as well, looking kind of mid and longer term at what the opportunities are at the various stations. And in Anne Arundel County, those stations, as you saw on the slide that Joe showed earlier, were Odenton, Cromwell, Glen Burnie, which is on the light rail, and then Laurel Racetrack on the MARC line. I'd like to turn to Matt to see if you could talk to us a little bit about those specific stations and what County Executive Pittman would like to see there, and some of the things that you might be doing at those stations, and then we'll open it up to others as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. First, I want to thank the folks of the Greater Washington Partnership for launching this study, because it's just going to be a catalyst for us to do a lot of things that this administration wanted to do and has been working on, but this is really a launching point for us, and it really highlights the importance of the work that we've been trying to do and that folks across the region have been doing. I think it's no surprise to anyone that Anne Arundel County, given our geography, location, and our neighbors who've been more successful at TOD than we have, is a little bit behind some of the rest of the region. And so that's something that we take very seriously. That's something that we want to address. There's no reason we should be as far behind as we are. And that's why highlighting, the opportunities in these three stations was really critical for us. Odenton is arguably, it's the only state designated TOD within Anne Arundel County. It's been a crown jewel for a while, and we've had some fits and starts to try and get something off the ground there over the years. There was a P3 that came close, but wasn't quite all the way there. But as you read through the report and you look at the component elements that we have in Odenton, we have a TIF there. We have money that has been generated by the TIF. The TIF will be kicking off money for improvements moving forward. We have the capability to build the garage that's mentioned in the report, to work with the state and partner with them to make sure that we're getting the type of development that we want there. And I think where you have other capital improvements that are going to be going into that Odenton area that will help benefit the station itself as well as the surrounding community. So we have money, we have resources, we have amenities, and we just really want to take all these things together and start working. We also have a very committed community that's been working on the Odenton Town Center plan for over a decade, and that's one of the reasons we're really well positioned at that station. On the Cromwell Glen Burnie station, I think we've got a light rail station there that's underutilized. We could use more service. Obviously, you'll see that come up over and over again, I'm sure, with the rest of the panel. But we also have some great things happening in Glen Burnie. We have a new overlay zone there that allows us to have incentives for additional development. We have a bunch of county-owned land there that we are going to be engaging a consultant to see how could we use that land as a catalyst and bring in a private partner potentially to really make an anchor there that will start the revitalization there. A lot of folks remember Silver Spring from 25 years ago, and it was back then we were talking about the Mall of America coming to Silver Spring, and Governor Glendening nixed it, and look what we have there now. And there's no reason in our minds that Glen Burnie down the road can't be in a similar place, revitalized and successfully using its transit as a way to bring people in. And the Laurel Racetrack is another phenomenal example, right on the border with Howard County. And we've got tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of state money coming in to revitalize that resource and make it a national destination for people to see horse racing. So we feel like we have a ton of the component tools that are highlighted in the report at each of these stations. And we really look forward to maximizing the use of all of them and making sure that we do it in an inclusive way. I think the equity component highlighted in the report is something that is front of mind for all of us. We want to make sure that we've got affordable housing as we get these stations off the ground.
Thanks, Matt. That's a fantastic overview of all that, that the county has going on at those stations. I'd love to hear a little bit from Nimisha, if you would jump in with some of the state's approach to TOD, particularly at these 3 stations that we've been talking about.
Sure. So we engage with local jurisdictions in different ways for different TODs. We, at this point in time, are actively engaged with the county on all the 3 stations or the projects. We're working with the economic development at Anne Arundel County on Odenton and Cromwell, as well as Laurel Racetrack. So I would like to just briefly discuss Odenton, because I think that's one of the primary, I guess, major stations that Anne Arundel County is looking at to promote as a TOD. And, as Matt indicated, this has been in discussions for more than 10 years. It is a state designated TOD. So, and of course, there's TIF funding available from the county. We really do think it's a great candidate for a TOD, and it's going to be a great economic driver in this region. Currently, we are actually looking at the holistic, taking a holistic approach as far as the parcels are concerned, or the land is concerned. We're looking at state-owned properties, we're looking at county-owned properties and private parcels as well. And also discussing with the county on improvements to the public infrastructure, the garage. Parking, structured parking, very, very important for MTA commuters. We want to make sure that, they're made whole. This area is going to boom. This Penn Line, and just being where it's located, there's a lot of ridership. I know Kevin indicated there's a decrease in ridership, but this is near-term impact at this point in time of the pandemic. But I think in the future, long-term, this is going to be an important station to look at.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wes, did you want to comment a little bit? I know you've been working on some of these projects for a number of years, and your approach, with the Economic Development Corporation has a little bit a different set of tools at play. What have you found to be most exciting or most promising in terms of what's happening with regard to TOD in the county today?
Sure. Yeah, I agree with Nimisha. I'm definitely optimistic about everything that's been going on, especially with Odenton. It seems like there's been a lot of momentum there recently. But yeah, it's been said. I've been with AAEDC now for over 10 years, and I think we were talking about the Odenton TOD on my first day, and probably long before that as well. But I'm optimistic with the steps that the county and the state have made to lay the groundwork for a future successful TOD. It was mentioned that the TIF was passed in 2014. And for a lot of projects, that's the most difficult part, is getting that financing in place. So when we talk to the private sector about, partnering on some of these, they're relieved when they hear that that's already done and in place and can move forward. But, I think Odenton has a lot of advantages. I think that it was mentioned before that post-pandemic, we don't know what the commuting pattern is going to be. We thought we knew before. We thought we knew how many spaces that we would need, for example, at that station. And in talking now, we don't really know, and nobody knows. But I think the advantage to Odenton is there are multiple parcels which would allow for a phased development, which would mean that there would be less disruption to the current parking services. And there's also flexibility when it comes to market demand. If you do it in phases, nobody knows what that parking need is going to be in a couple of years. Nobody knows what the office market need is going to be in a few years. So if that changes, I think that that's a project that can really adapt to whatever the market calls for. And I think that's important because there's been a lot of mixed use developments and town center developments in the county that have struggled with trying to reach the market demand that was maybe 8 to 10 years ago was what the demand was, but the market's changed since then. So I think having that flexibility is important for all these projects, but especially Odenton.
So there's a lot of different resources that you all have spoken about. The TIF, obviously very important. The state TOD designation program has come up. But there are also obviously some challenges in terms of finding the resources for the new structured parking. There are going to be infrastructure needs at the other stations that we've talked about in terms of increasing access to those stations. You all are professionals in this space. Are there examples of programs or policies that you've seen used in either other parts of the region or other parts of the country that perhaps might be applicable in Anne Arundel, and you'd like to have those programs or policies at your disposal?
I'll take a first shot at it. And I just want to revisit one thing you mentioned to Kevin, which is I think the discussion around the pandemic is going to be fascinating, in part because the competitive advantage we've had as a region for TOD for 25 years that we've been touting is congestion. And now it's going to have to be about placemaking, right? It's going to have to be about getting these areas, regardless of the transit. Hopefully people come on transit, but to make sure that the development we're doing around these stations is inclusive and is destination oriented, whether they come hopefully via transit, but even if they don't come via transit. And so how we change the discussion a little bit around TOD in the midst of the pandemic, although I agree 100% with Kevin, in the long run, it's going to be something that transit is always going to be there. But I honestly think, to your real question, Sarah, we have the tools that we need for the most part. It's a lot about the momentum. It's a lot about the collaboration between the state and the county. It's a lot about our private sector partners working with us. I think Maryland is ahead of the game. I think the county is ahead of the game as far as the tools. I don't think there's a magic 8-ball that's gonna reveal something that isn't in the toolbox necessarily. The tools are there, and it is political will. It's standing up in certain instances to the fact that, we want density. A lot of people don't want it. When we want density, we also want to have affordable housing. And a lot of people don't want that either, quite frankly. And so it's the spine to make it happen. It's the partnerships to make it happen. And it's the collaboration. But I'm sure there's other great examples, but I feel that it's not a matter of not having the right tools in the toolbox.
Anyone else like to comment on that?
Yeah, I'll probably add to what Matt indicated. I think, most important thing is really to enhance these partnerships among the key stakeholders and having that open communication. I think we all need to collectively determine a strategy as we move forward with, like common goals and common interests. And part of that strategy is really to find out if there's funding opportunities for these projects. I mean, some of the tools like TIFs, pilots, these have been used, and these are going to become more evident as we kind of move forward. But even like the state TOD designation, I mean, that's a tool in the toolbox. I mean, it definitely helps, and you know, there are certain benefits to it. Other state agencies like DHCD, you know, they have sustainable community designation, which again, that's another one which promotes TODs. So, you know, I think most of the people online know that, you know, Smart Growth Sub-Cabinet is a public body that has representation of all the state agencies, and it recommends, you know, for designations for TODs. So as far as the funding is concerned, I think we do have, as Matt indicated, some of the tools are already there. It's a matter of educating people and making everyone aware of what's out there. You know, federal funding is important from my perspective at this point in time. State, you know, we are all experiencing fiscal constraints, as you know, all of you know, and so federal funding, federal grants, federal programs are important to tap into at this point in time when it comes to TODs.
Absolutely, a point well taken. And obviously you are, you know, the whole region benefits from an extremely dedicated and well-coordinated congressional delegation, you know, with very well-positioned members, Senator Van Hollen on the Appropriations Committee, Congressman Brown, who introduced us today. So they all are very active and very supportive, which is going to be very helpful to the region, I think, and has been already. Let's shift gears a little bit. Joe alluded to the fact that equity and inclusiveness needs to be something that's considered in TOD from the outset. If you kind of wait until the development is done, you kind of miss the boat there. So I'd like to hear a little bit from each of you how your agency approaches the question of inclusiveness and access for households of all incomes, for businesses of all sizes, to make sure that as we're leveraging these developments, that they really do come back to the benefit of the whole community.
I'll take a first shot.
Thanks.
Sure. So, you know, just a note that, you know, equity is really at the core of everything we really do at MTA. It's not only federally required, but we do a lot of analysis of equity as we look into changing service types or service plans or routes or things like that. And so I think that's a really key piece for us. I think as it relates to kind of what we're talking about here, I think that, you know, Joe hit on some key things that are important for us. You know, a focus on affordable housing, a focus on business retention and inclusive growth. And so I think, you know, from MTA's perspective, there's sort of internal processes that we have in place to evaluate equity. There's also this external side that's our partnership with the community, our partnership with the counties to push for and ensure things like affordable housing are happening. Ultimately, MTA, oftentimes in these situations, you know, we're not the landowner. We don't make land use decisions. And I would argue that, you know, one big reason that we don't have TOD is a result of a lot of the sprawling patterns and really lack of coordination with transit over the past few decades. Don't get me wrong, I think we've done a great job over the past, you know, 5 to 10 years, but the patterns that were in place today and that we're dealing with today started way before, you know, all of us were born, right? And so we're continuing to combat that. I think a second piece I'll just note with regard to equity, and, you know, Sarah, I think you touched on it well, is ensuring equal access for different races and different incomes. I think a piece that is often forgotten is access for disabled communities and the need to fight in TODs for appropriate pedestrian pathways and ADA accessibility and things like this. I've seen a lot of developments where that bike access, that sidewalk access, those good sidewalks are the first thing to go when you got to cut costs. And as the transit agency, you know, I think sometimes we come on a little strong, right? We come on as, hey, we got to make this perfect. We got to make this great for the pedestrians and the transit riders. And I think that can make some folks a little nervous, like, oh, that's going to scare off a prospective developer. That said, I think it's incumbent on us as really the protectors of tax-paying riders and the folks that are on our system to demand really good multimodal connections in these TODs. and to say, you know, damn it, we need good sidewalks and we need good connections throughout the entire site, and to fight for it. I think that's where our strong kind of equity piece kind of comes in from the transit side.
And I just quickly add here, I think on our end, we're equity is the primary focus of everything that we're working on at the moment. We have our general development plan, Plan 2040, that is going to our county council on March 1st to be heard. So that's a big step forward for us. We'll be doing regional plans after that, focused very specifically on smaller region plans that allow us really to highlight and take the issues, particularly as it relates to affordability, to heart, obviously within these 3 stations, but more broadly within the areas. Anne Arundel County's developed in a way, if you look at the 3 stations, I mean, Odenton, we have an affordability problem throughout all of Odenton. It's a very expensive place to live. If you go to the Cromwell station in Glen Burnie, you don't have quite the affordability problem that you do in Odenton, but we still have a problem getting affordable housing there. We have the overlay district that you can get density bonuses. We want to have affordable housing guarantees in there. That's not universally accepted across the board for folks, and it takes a significant effort and investment for us to be able to get it. And I think when you look over at Lowell Park, you have some stable communities there, and you have some communities in transition. And so I think, you know, regional planning process is really key. Anne Arundel County is so diverse geographically, demographically, that to have one comprehensive plan looking at the whole county would just be too big picture for it ever to drill down to get the outcomes that we're trying to talk about in conversations like this.
Nisha, did you want to?
Yeah. So just to add to that, you know, typically from our perspective or real estate perspective, we follow the lead of the local jurisdiction on their requirements as far as equity is concerned, and you know, the affordable housing. But you know, achieving that right balance is what it is. You know, there are state agencies like DHCD. They have programs and incentives, you know, like for affordable rental housing development, and there are different programs, and you can go up on their website and look at it. But I think from state's perspective, making a deliberate effort, you know, as far as identifying what programs and what coincide with, say, Anne Arundel County's programs, and educating the stakeholders on these different programs and making that information available is important. I also, you know, want to just say that engaging private sector, you know, from the get-go, I mean, they need to be, you know, they should understand, if they're developers, they need to understand the demographics of the area where they're thinking of engaging with the county and the state. It's important for that initial engagement and understanding of what's asked of them, and what, you know, where is the private funds coming in from, and how is the public funds, you know, going to, you know, help with that. So I just think that engagement of all stakeholders from the beginning, and understanding the demographics and the affordable housing versus equity and inclusiveness, all of that needs to be discussed and strategized as we move forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And I mean, to some extent, you anticipated the next question I was going to ask, which had to do with how should the private sector be engaged? And one of the things that occurs to me is that we often talk about the private sector as if it is one thing, a monolithic thing that you can just go call the private sector. Well, it's not, right? You have employers, you have different sizes, you have anchor institutions like universities, hospitals, et cetera. You have philanthropy, you have investors like banks and financial institutions, all sorts of different mini sectors that make up the private sector. And all of them could have a role to play. I'd be interested to know what you have found to be good, you know, best practices in terms of working with these different elements of the private sector, and what you might like to see from them. Would anyone like to jump in, Nimisha?
Okay, so I'm going to be very brief on this. I think in most cases that our projects, you know, the land around the station is owned by the state or the county, but there are properties that are owned by private sector, and I think again I want to emphasize that the private sector needs to work hand in hand with the public sector, whether they have, whatever their interests are, but understanding the benefits, understanding the incentives, understanding the programs, because these are small things, but a lot of times what happens is the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. So there are so many programs that are out there, and there's so many incentives that are out there. I think educating the private sector, and this means community, businesses, developers themselves. I think that's very important. The private sector also, engaging with the local jurisdiction on zoning requirements, zoning amendments. I mean, this could be, something to encourage TODs, whatever the mix of uses, whether it's commercial or residential versus, retail. But all of that, I think, engaging with the county's planning office, zoning office, and also from a private sector. I mean, they can form coalitions, they can engage different businesses and try to figure out what are the benefits of being in a certain TOD. I mean, there are opportunities that are available for people to be next to a transit. So again, educating people, making that information available, being transparent. These are important things from public sector's perspective and also from private sector's perspective.
Sarah, I'll just add, I think that's a great question. And if I look back in the last 20 years at TOD, I'm not sure that you can put your finger on one thing that if the private sector did differently or did better. Some of the success stories, you're surprised are success stories. Some of the things that fell apart, you're surprised that they fell apart. I know Kevin and I were talking the other day about State Center. I was working on that in 2004, and we had all the component pieces there to make it happen, and it's still nothing has changed at that TOD yet. And so I think some of it is the private sector understanding the political constraints, and they understand politics and they understand political constraints, but also, we are coming at it from a different angle on the public side than the private side, right? And I think that needs to be acknowledged, that there are different goals. I'll throw this out there for the group, which I'm sure not everyone will agree with, but I think sometimes too, when we go down the P3 path, we're putting together such big deals and such humongous components with one partner that it is hard to get that lift off the ground, and it's hard to get it all finalized and done. And you have a window of momentum and movement, both politically, financially, and every other way to get these projects going. And when they become so humongous that it drags it down, it loses momentum. So part of what I'd love to see, and other panelists' thoughts on, is sort of P3s where it's multiple smaller P3s within these TOD areas, rather than one massive partnership with the development company to come in and do the work.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think it's definitely important that we have the private sector as partners. These projects, frankly, can't get done without them. Sometimes they help fill in the gap financially when there's a financial shortfall. I think the biggest thing, though, is identifying partners in the private sector that can buy into the vision of the public sector. So they need to share the vision of the county. And that goes back to what Amisha was talking about, engaging with planning and zoning. What is the county's vision for these communities moving forward? We need that buy-in, and we need them to really see that vision. And I think that, we also need them because as government and public sector, we don't think like developers, unfortunately. And we sort of need that, we need that way of thinking to kind of kickstart these projects sometimes. I think sometimes we sit around and we plan and then we do a study and then we do another study. And, here we are still talking about some of these developments where I think really we need somebody that can come in, share the vision with the county, and have the wherewithal to to kind of drive the process a little bit. I think that's what we need.
Sarah, I'll just a quick take. I mean, I think from our perspective, I think one thing that the transit has kind of not done a great job of doing has been promoting sort of what the MTA sees as the potential at these stations. And Wes, I think, hit it well in terms of the county putting forward a vision and others putting forward a vision. I think transit has a responsibility to put forward a vision as well and to say, here's what we want it to look like. I think for our part, so we published a few years ago our TOD Design Guidelines with some general concepts. It's a great 62-page kind of graphic document. And then we've produced also some station area concepts. And we have one, for Odenton and a variety of other stations. But I think for us, we certainly look at that as by no means prescriptive, but ways that, that area and that land and that station could be used to create a good TOD. And I say that not in the sense that it's, anything crazy. I mean, it's, how is the station, engaged in the structure? Is that designed kind of as a center? Are there public gathering spaces? Are there first floor, engaging retail uses? Is wayfinding? Is there good signage that says this way to transit? High density. Transit wants to be where people are. Like bottom line, transit wants to be where people are. And so the higher your density uses, the better and more successful that TOD is going to be. Is there a network of complete streets and safe streets? Has that been built into the design? I talked earlier about pedestrian access, car share, bike parking, all those things need to be built in. And so I think for our part, we've tried to sort of sprinkle in terms of what we're trying to communicate to the private sector and the development community. Here are some things that we think would make this successful and how you can really build a great T of the TOD.
Well, there's been so much in this conversation, and I don't even know where to follow up first. I will say that those TOD design guidelines are just incredibly helpful. I think that anyone, if you haven't looked at them, you should, because that is exactly what is needed, is something that says this is what we're looking for from the transit agency perspective. In this case, these are the features or factors or characteristics that we're trying to achieve. So helpful to have that vision laid out. I do want to say, going back to Matt's point about, do we approach these as one big project that can sometimes become almost overwhelming when it's so big, or maybe break it up into smaller ones. In the partnerships piece of this report, which builds on the fantastic technical work of Ernst Young, the Ernst Young report, EY report, put out kind of what would the TOD look like if we're able to kind of address all of the barriers at once. It's a fantastic vision, right? There's a lot of potential. In the partnerships kind of complementary strategy report, we had a small section on what are things that the counties and potentially the state, I think primarily focused on the county, what could the county do in the near term before necessarily or complementary to a bigger TOD project. And some of the things that came up there are things like pop-up events at some of these stations. How can we indicate to the community that this is going to be an activity center? We're starting to get it ready. We're starting to get people to think about it as a place. And then also some of those first last mile connections, those don't necessarily have to be tremendously huge infrastructure projects. Some of them are, but not all of them. Some of them might be as simple as crosswalks or traffic calming measures near the station so that people who are living there today can actually easily get to the transit station. I see Matt nodding. I'll turn to you, Matt, to see if you'd like to respond to some of those ideas that are more incremental, but still potentially very helpful.
Yeah, I agree. I'll use Odenton as an example. I think, we're looking now for what we can do in some of the surrounding land uses to help support the TOD. And, we have just half a block away, we've got a, facilities maintenance yard right in the area where we're talking about getting high density development to help support transit. And so, we're going to be looking in our next capital budget to move that so that we can get a better use there, because it's clearly not the most effective use there. We've got other land there where we're looking at potentially putting a park right near the transit station, and those types of amenities and that connectivity is really important. And I think Kevin and I were just talking the other day about concept plans where, we have to make sure that the bus service and the transit service off of the MARC line is equally as important as the MARC line itself, right? And we all love fixed rail, but if fixed rail only gets you to one place and you need to go a half mile down, it's not enough. And that's another area where I think the county is working hard. We have our Move Arundel plan, and we want to build on that. But that last mile, I think the report does a great job of pointing out, there's some low-hanging fruit there for us that we could take advantage of to better leverage the asset that we have in the existing stations.
Thanks, Matt. So we just have like a couple of quick minutes left. And as we're closing out, I did want to address, it seems from some of the chat conversation that's been going on and some of the things that have been said here, that it's all, for many of the folks on this call, we understand kind of what TOD might look like in Anne Arundel County, what it would mean and what the benefits are. That's not necessarily universal across the county. This in some sense is going to be a little bit of a cultural shift for a county that has been primarily dominated, by auto uses, and people tend to drive, and we're suggesting there can be another approach. If you were to sum up in a very short amount of time, 20, 30 seconds, the benefits of TOD, why the county should be thinking about TOD now, to someone who might be skeptical, how would you explain that? What would you say? Just run down the line. Who would like to start?
I'll start, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I just want to say that, as the density in the cities is going up, congestion on the roads is getting worse, the design elements of the TOD become more and more relevant. It provides more flexibility to folks. It provides more choices to people. As technologies advance and we have emphasis on work-life balance, the live, work, play environment around stations becomes desirable. So TODs, is the way to go. I mean, it provides all kind of flexibility as we move post-pandemic. And with businesses figuring out whether they need to have commercial space or not, it's something that is out there. They're going to be looking at shared approach, having these discussions, or having this approach of shared use next to transit, which gives them more accessibility if there are any face-to-face meetings and things like that. So definitely TODs are big.
Yeah, and I would say, most people who are averse to new development, one of the first things that they're concerned about is traffic, and TODs help reduce that. They take cars off the road, and I think that is one reason why I think this administration has, supported TODs in the way that they have, is because it's new development, but it reduces traffic. And it's also a great amenity for the county, especially, from an economic development perspective, when we're talking to companies interested in locating here. This would just be another amenity to have to promote, to try to get them to locate here.
And just to echo Wes, I mean, we're putting ourselves at a competitive disadvantage without it, right? Especially in this region. Just look around at our neighbors in Prince George's who are leveraging their metro stations. Montgomery County is doing a phenomenal job. We don't have quite the assets on the transit side that they do, but we need to leverage what we've got and do a better job with it, because it would be a complete wasted opportunity on our end not to do so.
Everything everybody just said. I mean, I think from our perspective, transit has obviously tremendous economic benefits, economic development, environmental benefits, quality of life benefits. The county, Sarah, one of your comments is that, Anne Arundel County is very car centric, and it's car centric because it's been built that way. And if you start building in a transit supportive way, I think you could see some changing attitudes and some changing behaviors as well. And I think it would be a great opportunity to, again, just springboard off those transit stations that are there and use that to do some great development in the county. And
then Kevin, you'll get us a rail line into Annapolis too if we start really successfully, right?
There you go. Yeah.
Now we're really getting into the fun stuff.
I know, the horse trading begins.
I can see Joe getting really excited when the rail to Annapolis gets mentioned. And on that note, I want to thank everyone. This has been a really fantastic discussion. I'm excited to continue working with you all. The partnership is looking forward to that. And I'm sure that everyone who's been active on the chat and has been listening patiently is looking forward to the breakout rooms, which are coming next. So Joe, let me turn it back to you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to all of the panelists. That was great and fun to listen and learn with you and work together to try to address all this stuff. We're going to go ahead and go into breakout rooms here in a second, where we want to work together collaboratively to tackle 1 to 2 of these 4 questions that you see in front of you here on the screen. I think this is really important. This is an early opportunity for us collectively as a community to have a conversation about, what is the vision? What is the opportunity? Where do we want to take this? Because I think what I heard in the conversation is Anne Arundel and the state of Maryland have the tools. It has the stations, it has the opportunity. It's the question of how we as a collective, public, private, nonprofit can work together to go ahead and bottle it up and push it into reality. I think if that's what we want as a preferred development priority in the near term, I think we're going to need to work together across various different interests. So my colleague, Jenna, is amazing with these breakout rooms, and she's going to go ahead and assign people to a room. You will be in a room with a colleague of ours from the Greater Washington Partnership or Ernst Young, who will be managing the conversation. We would ask that you go ahead and go around the room and introduce everybody, and then maybe pick 1 to 2 of these conversations. We'll come back in 15 minutes and debrief, and then Tod Lang from the Baltimore Metropolitan Council will wrap things up. But please be respectful of everybody's interests and provide an opportunity for everyone to speak. So with that, thank you again to the panel. Please join us in the breakout rooms, and for everyone else, we will see you on the other side. Just be patient for a quick second here. Thank you everybody for participating in that conversation. We're going to do a quick 30-second recap from each room just to share kind of what the conversation was, and then we'll hand it to Mr. Lang. From the partnership side, who would like to go first and kind of give a recap from their room? Mariceli?
And after all this time, I still didn't learn how to unmute my Zoom. We had a really good conversation. It was really interesting to see it really sort of took an organic approach, and we could barely answer one question, which is a good thing because there's so much to be talked about in terms of equity and access to opportunity, and we did talk about that in our group. Someone mentioned something really important, that all the pieces need to fit together. A lot of times there's a lot of transit-oriented developments that are done without having relationship to one another, and it's almost they're not talking to each other in terms of bringing the region together and moving the region forward. Another very interesting point was that this one actually the same one came up this morning, is that a lot of people, the public, is very adverse to more growth. So how do you really inform people and educate people in terms of doing a campaign that there are public benefits? There is a way to do TOD projects with the inclusive lens. And then another very important point that it was such a good conversation. I just tried to catch all the really cool and good points of the conversation. So the other one was, we do have to also worry about our transit system. We may have a great development plan, but we need to make sure that everything is aligned.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I will go next to John Hilligus, who has been a leader of this entire endeavor for the partnership.
Yeah, we had a great discussion. I think we touched on a lot of themes that were kind of discussed in the panel. But one of the things that was kind of stressed was just really the need to have a plan and to start setting kind of the responsibilities and timeline together or down, because all of the people on the call today, we know the benefits of TOD, and we don't need to be told about the benefits that we need to start implementing. And another thing, though, is about flexibility in that plan, and not, just being very rigid and the plan you set, which then can, push partners away. And then the third is just the importance of bringing people together through conversations like this and all sorts of conversations, whether it's, a TOD working group or the like, because there is a lot of complexity around TOD. And so the more we can come together to kind of talk them out and set that vision, but also be flexible in that vision, the more successful we'll be.
Perfect. I believe the next one that I'll call upon is maybe Sarah.
Yep. So these breakout rooms have been really fun, and it's great to have different perspectives shared. We focused primarily on the fact that we need to explicitly figure out how to bring development to places where we want it to be through incentives or vision or all combination of those things. And then we kind of merged into the fact that developers often have kind of a bad reputation among the public. They're not necessarily seen as acting in the public's interest, and that developers often are the ones who will lead or definitely participate in community building and placemaking activities. And that then we kind of morphed into, we need to help the public generally understand the role of all the different players in TOD, what developers do, what TOD is, what it would mean for them in their day-to-day lives to be able to have access to a community like this. And then we talked a little bit about how other types of transit besides fixed rail can also be really helpful in creating access for people, including bus rapid transit and things like that. So those are some of our themes.
Perfect, perfect. Steve, do you want to give a recap?
Sure. So we had a good amount of discussion around zoning and the need to sort of, take the long-term view, thinking about, the second question, which is what does success look like? And understanding that there's multiple stakeholders involved, making sure that there's clarity of vision around it, streamlined approach, developer friendly, to ensure there's interest to continue to develop and put the infrastructure in place, which was also discussed as a key need. It was mentioned that Odenton has a TOD master plan already, and can that be leveraged in some ways for the other two station stops or station areas. It was also an interesting comment about it's okay to use examples of success elsewhere rather than go with piecemeal legislation. It's far better to copy something that might already have been done and done well elsewhere. So thought that was a very valuable and interesting comment as well.
Perfect, perfect. Next we'll go to Coley.
Unmuting. Cool. So we've, one of our main topics was focusing on the importance of space and land use development, like collecting buy-in where development can lead to more development to bring certain uses so the plan can be realized and the density is in place. Don't necessarily develop for transit, but develop as if transit is the icing on the cake, which I really liked.
Nice, nice. And then Justin, do you want to give a recap on your table?
Sure. I mean, I think most of the points were captured by others. Another key takeaway was just finding the balance between working with existing communities in these areas and really showing the value of introducing TOD and opportunities that involves. But everything else was captured, so.
Perfect. Yeah, and from our table, I think, putting icing on top here, right? When the stars align, you need to be able to leverage it with both political will, incentives, and a process that's efficient. And I think that encapsulates a lot of what the conversation here was. I think, aligning interests and plans and investment priorities is important. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you. I'll come back after Tod says a few words, but Tod and team at BMC have been leading efforts at the regional level for years in this conversation. And so we wanted to provide an opportunity. Tod, we'd love to get your recap, your thoughts on the conversation, but also kind of your efforts and where you guys are taking the conversation to.
Sure. Thank you very much, Joe. Listen, on behalf of the Baltimore Regional Transportation Board and the Baltimore Metropolitan Council, we want to thank the panelists. We also like to thank the sponsors of this project and the webinar, the Greater Washington Partnership, Ernst Young and Sarah Klein. We really appreciate these partners bringing a focus to the need for vibrant, multi-use development that is well served by reliable, well-connected transit. Our board is remaining supportive of these efforts. They've shown this through both financial and technical support, in the development of programs like the Move Anne Arundel Transportation Master Plan that really sets out an ambitious and actionable multimodal transportation plan for the county that hopefully will be used well in their development of their new general development plan. The board also recently completed a study to improve over 90 transfer points between the MTA and the locally operated transit systems, including those in Anne Arundel County. We're starting up a review of 1,600 bus stops for the locally operated transit systems, including those in Anne Arundel County and the city of Annapolis. As Kevin mentioned, these will not only just look at the conditions of the individual stops and recommended improvements, but look at the access conditions to those stops, because it's very important to look beyond the actual footprint of the bus stops and make sure that people are able to get to those programs regardless of their abilities. Beyond this, we're committed to implementing the recommendations of the recently completed regional transit plan developed by the Maryland Transit Administration, including not only the transit operating improvements, but also furthering studies on the 30 corridors that were identified in the plan for potential future transit improvements. Kevin mentioned we focus on the T and TOD again, so I'm going to steal that because we feel that really need to improve and expand our transit system to make it a 24/7 viable option to support true transit-oriented development. And again, we really appreciate sponsors like the Greater Washington Partnership for their work in our region, and hope it reinforces actions at both the local, regional, and state level to support TOD. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tod. Thank you, Tod, for all that you guys are doing and your partnership with us. We'll wrap up today. I think, we didn't intend for our study to be the end all be all. I think one of my breakout room stars said, how are we going to move this thing forward? And I think that's a question for all of us here, as well as others that didn't make it today. And I think we look forward to working with the county executive and his team, the state, local elected officials and citizens to try to do our part to help put the recommendations into practice. And as we've said, when the stars align, make sure that we're ready to catalyze that opportunity and realize the vision. So thank you all very much. Special thank you to the project team at EY, Sarah Klein, and John Hilligus helping lead this effort. And we look forward. We're not done. There's a long way to go, and we look forward to partnering with everybody to make to see better results within these station areas. Thank you all.